Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's the top of the hour, so let's get going with today's Go Global webinar series, How to Sell Online in Europe. Let's get started, and thank you for joining us from wherever you may be. I can see through the registrants that today we are welcoming people from across the US. Good morning to you, and in Europe, so a very good afternoon to you. And of course, we have attendees from the Middle East and India, so a very good evening to you, wherever you are. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is John Worthington. I am CEO here at IBT Online, and I have the huge pleasure of introducing today's webinar. And I'm back in our office in London with Susanna Hardy, our wonderful Director of Client Services. It is Susanna and her team of colleagues in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain that have been curating all of that useful online sales information to get the valuable and practical stuff for today's Go Global webinar. So before we get started, we're going to just have a moment of housekeeping so that we all know exactly where we are. And today's webinar, do know, is one in our series of Go Global webinars. All of them are driven with an objective to help you grow your sales, your brands, and your businesses globally. The Go Global webinar series is well over 3 years old now, so there is a rich catalog of webinars that have been recorded and available to you on demand. So if you just have to see that URL at the bottom, ibt.onl/resources, go and check it out, and there is a history there. And for future webinars, we also have the webinars recording there for you to go and register for future webinars. Today's webinar will be 45 minutes long, and there will be 4 polls. So please be ready and join us when we announce a poll and give us your opinion. We'd really like to hear from you. There will also be questions. Now, in your box there, you can see on the right of your screens, questions. Click on that. Please submit your questions so that we can get back to you. If we do not answer your questions at the end of this webinar, you do know that we'll get back to you directly afterwards. There is a chat box, so don't hesitate to chat. Also know that there is going to be a brief survey at the end of this webinar, so please respond. And finally, sit back and relax and enjoy the recording, because on Friday in your email inbox, we'll be sending you the recording and slide deck. So there you have it. If it's in the morning, there's coffee, there might be tea or a cocktail if it's the end of the day. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's webinar. Let's move straight into the subject of Europe, Europe's macro picture. Why are we doing this webinar? Why are we talking about it? Europe, large, prosperous, easy to do business with, and online. Just in case that we forget, let us remind ourselves that Europe does include 3 of the top 6 economies in the world. Germany, in 4th position, has an economy of $3.3 trillion. The United Kingdom in 5th with $2.9 trillion, and France in 6th with $2.4 trillion. These are World Bank numbers from March 2007. If you aggregate that, Europe with 28 is, by GDP terms, the world's #1 economy with over 500 million prosperous citizens. So we're talking about a huge economic bloc with a huge economic opportunity, and it's online. Those numbers coming out of Europe now are looking up. Europe is going, the consumer and buyer index figures show increasing confidence. And these are obviously good for the European economy. So the online sales and e-commerce numbers in Europe are as well, they're on fire. It's double-digit growth, and it is, of course, the way to do business in the future. Susanna will be sharing more information with you in the details later. But of course, let us also look at this in context. With economics, there is politics. And so if we look beyond it, there is an issue called Brexit. I don't propose to spend time on this today. It's full of known unknowns and many unknown unknowns. So we'll move forward on that and just mention the Merkel-Macron revival of that traditional Franco-German engine. It seems that the French elections have produced some good news in Macron and what that might produce for the European economies. Also, we have to bring into account from an American perspective, and for our American colleagues and attendees, there is the American, first, the new administration, Wilbur Ross. I was in DC last month, and actually that was a little picture that I took when asking him about TTIP and his view on US trade relations with Europe. His reply was interesting from the perspective that he was commented that the US needs more agreements, more trade agreements, and that they were looking at TTIP and would not actually come out with an announcement as to where they would go for it. But TTIP is clearly being studied by the current administration as a forward-looking way to do business with Europe. So beyond that, let's actually just spend a moment introducing IBT Online. Welcome today again. IBT Online, we're a private company, a US company, a European company. IBT stands for International Business and Technologies. We started business in 2002, helping companies go global and use website localization and international online marketing services, all of that to grow their sales, their brands and their businesses online globally. In the US, IBT Online has been recognized with a Champion of Trade Award through our Online Global program. We have agreements with 14 US states and over 400 US companies, helping them grow their exports. And today that is obviously very pertinent because we're going to be talking about Europe, whether it's B2B, B2C. We're going to be talking about websites in German for the Germans or websites in French for the French, how to get in there and do localized business for sales online in Europe. Right, introductions. It is time for me and a pleasure for me to introduce Susanna Hardy, our host presenter from IBT Online. Lucky to have Susanna with us today on her busy agenda. Susanna is Director for Client Services and heads up our global operations. When you listen to Susanna later, if you think that she sounds like an American, well, she's in fact half German, was born in Freiburg, but educated and worked in the US, that is in New York, as well as in Europe, in Brussels, Paris, and London. Susanna has immense expertise in the online business world and online marketing and has worked with a wide spectrum of companies during a career helping companies grow internationally. Over to Ian. Ian, thank you for joining us, Executive Assistant at the Institute of Export. For those not familiar, let me just say the Institute of Export and notably, of course, international trade is to enhance the export performance of the United Kingdom and setting and maintaining professional standards in international trade management and export practice. And Ian will tell us a lot about that. Ian is responsible for much of the Institute's research and international trade issues, so he's a guru in this and he'll be sharing his information with you. And he's responsible for the Institute's briefings vis-a-vis the government and what goes on there. Let's also, just for full disclosure, Ian has a vested interest in Europe because, as you may have guessed, he is in fact half Norwegian. So with that, Ian, are you with us and can you take over, please?
Hello, John, and hello, everybody. It's an absolute delight for us at the Institute of Exports to be taking part in this webinar with IBT, who are valued members of ours. The Institute offers very many different forms of support to businesses, but one of the newest things that people may not be aware of is we have now, from founding partners, taken over the Open to Export website, so it is now entirely run by us here at the Institute of Export. One of the wonderful things on the Open to Export website is the what we call the Export Action Plan, and for new exporters, this is a really useful online tool. It takes you through 5 key export steps, from getting started through selecting which market you should get into, how you reach customers, how you're going to price and get paid, and finally what delivery and documentation you'll need to think about. And if you follow through the 5 steps, at the end of it, when you've answered all those questions, you get this really useful business plan. And we find that banks absolutely love people who've taken the time to go through, because it really shows you've thought about how you are going to export into a new market. Additionally, if you actually go online and complete it at opentoexport.com, the the very best in every 6-month period get selected to go into a competition, and they get judged by a panel of very experienced exporters, and they can actually win £3,000 for their business. Next slide, please. Another useful thing that you may want to take a look at are our doing business in guides. Now, these cover all the world, but we've got several that are covering European countries, and there are always more coming online. They have really good basic info about individual countries, and they're a really good place to start your research if you're looking into a new market. You can get a physical copy, just have to drop us a line at the Institute of Export, but they're also available online on the website, and there's even an app. So if you go to the App Store and put in Doing Business in Guides, you'll be able to download the app and be able to download any of the guides you like. As I say, these are all free. Okay, moving on. Right, let's turn to the subject of today's webinar, selling online in Europe. Although we'll be looking at online selling, please remember, selling online is not really any different to selling by traditional methods. So our advice is always be prepared and do your research before you move into any market. Too many people fail, too many businesses fail because they haven't done adequate research. And this is what the Institute's all about. We can help teach you how to do that research and what you need to be looking at. But when it comes to Europe, remember, the single market, as it's called, is not a single market. The EU at the moment is made up of 28 different countries, all with their own cultures, different languages, and different nuances. So be ready to adapt whatever product you have in terms of your design, the brand, and even the customer service you're thinking of giving. But above all, if you're selling online, localize your website. People buy from people who speak their language. Okay, next slide, please. As it says, I suppose I will have to be the one who's going to mention the elephant in the room at the moment, as far as the UK is concerned, and that's Brexit. The bottom line is, nobody knows what's going on at the moment, and it all remains to be seen what will happen. However, what we do offer at the Institute are our post-Brexit planning workshops. These have been very, very popular, and we look at how you can manage your existing business, how you can plan for the future, and start looking at some of the technical things you should really think about planning for, so you can take into account any outcome of the negotiations. And it also, if you look at these, they will really help you look beyond the EU and to other markets. And of course, by doing this, you're going to save yourself time, save yourself money, and really just be prepared for whatever happens. Our next workshops are in September in London and in November in Manchester. There's a load of information on the Institute of Export website, www.export.org.uk. And with that, I think I can hand over back to John and Susanna.
Indeed, and I will just say it's time for the first poll related to that. Ian, thank you very much indeed. And so here, please, related to all of this and what Ian has been talking about. So here we go, launch. Are you ready? What is your main export challenge for Europe? So please, what is your opinion? Is it finding the local partners? Is it tariff and customs? Is it, guess what, regulatory or even logistics or other? At the moment, we're getting it's find the right partner at about 70%, with tariff and customs number 2. I mean, that is interesting. I think I'm going to shut this one down and say, are you ready? Here we go. That's my little horn that says shut down for that one. And I'm going to close it. Thank you very much indeed, and hand back to Susanna.
Yes, thank you very much, John, and welcome everybody. Thank you for your time today. So what I'm going to be talking about really is about sort of specifically the online world, both for sort of what that means for small, medium-sized companies digitally in Europe, both for e-commerce, and then how to access that in the best possible way. First, I'm going to go through a couple of terms for that, like localization, or what kind of social media and search engine optimization we would definitely use. And then I'm going to also give you some case studies at the end to work through with some case studies of real life things that you can have hopefully identify with and so on. So without further ado, let's just talk a little bit about sort of what I would call the global digital ecosystem. This is a slide that actually dates from last year with information up to 2014. In a very changing world, these huge numbers are already past, are already out of date, but I think that they nevertheless give you some idea of some of the speed and size of the online world today. And it's worth sometimes just remembering that. We take the internet for granted. This didn't exist 15 years ago. So it really is a changing environment that's worth sort of thinking about in this sense. McKinsey produced a report in February 2016 about global data and communication flows, in which they tracked some of these things over the last 5 years, 10 years, and then forecast forwards, and certainly no slowdown in growth, in fact an acceleration. And their conclusion was really that digital flows are now more important as a change factor than the more traditional GDP elements in the trade in goods across the world. This is absolutely, this is quite monumental. And the heart of all this, what's underlying all this, is e-commerce. And e-commerce, in a sense, is where the future of trade is going to be playing out. So conventional trade and trade routes are actually in stagnant, or sometimes even in decline. But so it's all about, therefore, e-commerce, which is growing double-digit, and m-commerce triple-digit sometimes in most markets. So global cross-border e-commerce is forecast to be between 25 and 30% of global trade by 2020. That's in 3 years' time. So in other words, more of the world's trade is going through platforms and logistics rather than merchants and ships over the next few years. So it's an absolutely huge structural shift. By the way, one thing I want to point out right now is that the biggest bandwidth, in that sense, pipes as it were, is between the US and Europe. And that also looks set to continue over the next few years. So I guess in conclusion from this, I would say some of the old rules are changing. This new age of globalization means that there's a lot of difference now for companies and how they can succeed. Today it's all about being knowledge intensive rather than capital or labor intensive. It means you've got to have good broadband connections more than shipping lanes. So, much of it, digital flows basically open up a global economy to anyone with a good internet connection. And that reduces barriers to trade. And that is really, really good news for small and medium-sized enterprises, which is our core base of clients. So this online world for us, I think, is really fantastic news for small and medium-sized enterprises that want to export. You no longer need to be a huge multinational company to compete globally. Online levels that playing field. And you can see this, in fact, in terms of the big companies versus SMEs. Trading, their share of global trade has actually declined in favor of SMEs. And for us, really, the winners are going to be these well-connected, digitally literate SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises. So just looking at Europe as a whole, I think it's, as John was saying earlier, it's large, prosperous, easy to do business. It is extremely online. It is extremely digital. There's a lot of publications about this at the moment. Some of the numbers are a lot of different numbers out there. So I'm trying to keep the same source. The EU actually produces a lot of sources on this. In 2016, 85% of European households, not companies, all companies, but 85% of European households had access to the internet at home. And in the EU, about 71% of individuals are using the internet every single day. That's pretty amazing numbers. Some of the drivers in Europe on this, it's worth singling out. Okay, there's overall drivers like sort of e-commerce and the growth and things like that. But some of the drivers that are very specific to Europe are worth highlighting. One of the main ones that I would highlight is the digital agenda for Europe. This is an EU or cross-EU initiative which has been going now for a couple of years, and it has really put some very strong substance behind it to enable e-commerce, enable more trade within Europe, and so on. The bulk of that is through something called the digital single market. The objective, therefore, is to complete something called the digital single market, which will allow free movement of people, services, capital, so that individuals, businesses can access activities and services and products anywhere within the EU under the same same circumstances. So there's a very high level of consumer and personal data protection. It's also looking at postal rates. It's looking at payments. So there's basically three areas that the digital single market covers. It promotes better online access. It's supposed to have a good environment for digital networks to develop, and it means that the European economy should take advantage of this. So it's really pushing and driving a lot of the growth in Europe. A couple of things on this. In 2 days' time, roaming charges, mobile roaming charges will be abolished in the EU. So, no more mobile roaming charges. This is great news for consumers and certainly a reflection of how much is done online on your mobile-enabled platforms for e-commerce. In 1 year's time, in May 2018, we will have a pan-European set of data protection and privacy rules. So regulation is something that's going to come in very clear, very defined for all of Europe within 11 months. Also, within the same time frame, there will be the cybersecurity law as well implemented across Europe. So really, it's also about boosting e-commerce in the EU in order to give consumers more confidence to buy also anywhere they want. And part of that also was the European Single Euro Payments Area, this SEPA, Single Euro Payments Area. This was instituted and is currently in place. It's a way of harmonizing cashless euro payments across Europe. So it allows European consumers, businesses, public sector to make and receive transactions under the same conditions. Any credit, transfers, direct debit payments, all of it. It allows cross-border electronic payments in euros to be just as easy as domestic payments. So it covers the whole of the EU, even if you're not within the euro area. So it covers Iceland and Norway and Switzerland as well. And the advantage is obviously a single euro payment. This has been a huge boost and help to e-commerce as well. So that's one of the things that are going on. The digital single market also will have an impact on logistics. Within the next 12 months, we should have a leveling and a transparency of postal and logistic prices for shipments across the EU. Again, we think that will be a big driver. But before I go on to look particularly about online sales in Europe, John, if we have time for another poll, that'd be great.
Here we go. Absolutely. Here we go. So please, everybody, put down your coffee, your tea, or your cocktail, and here we go. Launching. Are you already selling online in Europe? Are you already do you already sell? So is it yes online and with market partners? So are you going with and through third parties? Or is it actually in market partners only? Or are you doing it directly? Yes online, or are you thinking about it? So let me give you some feedback from the attendees. It's 30% are saying category number one, yes online with in-market partners. So a lot of that is going on. That's great. Another category which is up there in the 30+% is thinking about it. There's a lot of thinking about it. And yes, online only is about 20%. So very interesting. Thank you. These numbers will be sent back to you on Friday. I will close that with a little bit of my dancing horn there. Susanna, that means it's back to you.
Thank you very much, John. Right. I just want to talk sort of a little snapshot of European e-commerce. First of all, the numbers, I try and get consistent numbers throughout. It's very hard to do so. This is an area which has a lot of statistics driven by it, but there's a hard to always get consistency in the numbers. I've tried where I can. The table on the right, for example, is in pounds and euros. The rest of the information is on dollars. I've used similar transaction currencies where I can. But at least it gives you some scale, some idea of sizes and of ranking as well. What I want to, the first thing I want to indicate with this is that Europe is pretty well the same size as the US in terms of B2C and B2B. It's actually growing slightly faster than the US, however, so should take over in terms of size and become the second largest area in the world. The first largest still remains China. Within Europe, 75%, 3/4 of European e-commerce is dominated by 3 of the countries, the UK, Germany, and France, in that order. And I'll do a little focus on those 3 in particular. The other countries, particularly Southern Europe, are fast catching up. They have very fast growth rates for this. So although they're much smaller, there's a great opportunity there as well. And we do have some other webinars which focus on specific countries online, and Southern Europe, for example, and the Nordics as areas, if you want to drill down on that. What I'd like to also point out is that B-commerce is twice, sometimes 3 times the size of B2C, of consumer. Because when we think about online, we often just think about the consumer. But in fact, B2B is growing almost as quickly and is, as I said, 2 to 3 times as large. It's much harder to get numbers on the B2B side. But what we can reflect is some of the surveys that are done. There was one done by Forrester Research just recently indicating that 74% of all companies who are looking on a B2B side research their purchases online, just the same way that consumers do. So really worth noting that if you're a manufacturer selling to the manufacturers, or B2B only. The other big trend, of course, is m-commerce, mobile commerce. This is in some countries, China, Indonesia, Brazil, it's actually significantly larger than the landline or the PC-based e-commerce. But in all countries, it is fast growing. And even in more mature internet markets, if that even exists, like the US, like much of Europe, m-commerce is pretty well now equivalent to 50% of online sales. And for example, Italy this year swung over more m-commerce than e-commerce for the first time. You'll see this in most markets, for example, in the US or in the UK, m-commerce is very significantly larger over specific high volume days. The US first went m-commerce majority on Thanksgiving weekend, and apparently a lot of Americans go out shopping. In the UK, similarly, major shopping periods, for example, pre-Christmas, you'll have m-commerce. So again, a lot of people need to make sure that their websites are really mobile enabled. There you go. And then the last little statistic I want to bring out really is just that cross-border sales are really, really growing. They're growing more like, so they're like doubling in size, albeit from a small base. But in today's world, in 2016 at least, the last numbers I had, 15% of European consumers were regularly shopping online from other EU countries. And this was, again, this is quite interesting, for example, taking advantage of currency shifts. When the UK referendum came out, the pound went down quite a bit, and we had a real surge of interest of online sales from consumers from Germany, from the Netherlands, from France, coming in and looking at UK pricing and UK sales and purchasing things in the UK. So again, they're starting to be some pretty savvy consumers as well as savvy businesses out there on the e-commerce. So just to focus a little bit on some of the big markets. First of all, the UK. The UK, we are a nation of shopkeepers. The UK is the third largest e-commerce market in the world, and is very mature, very very savvy about it. It is 70% of payment is done through credit cards and debit cards. It is also extremely price sensitive. So people are looking at pricing in a very reactive market, and a very social media market as well. Some of the very large names, Amazon is the #1 for consumers, but increasingly also for business to business. Amazon is also the largest digital advertising platform in the UK, and we'll find this again and again in Europe. Then just moving on, Germany, while the largest economy, it's in Europe, it is the 5th largest e-commerce market in the world. What's interesting to me is the ratio between B2C and B2B is a little bit different in Germany than in other markets. The B2B side is really much, much larger than the consumer side. Although Germany does have some big German websites, stores like Otto and Zalando, which are big. They're like an Amazon, or they're like a clothing store, like a big John Lewis, for example, equivalent, but in Germany. There's a couple of very specific characteristics of the German e-commerce market. First of all, really low credit card penetration rates. Germany is still a place that people make bank transfers, or actually they'll pay on delivery. So that poses some problems for people. So people expect to be knock at the door and you pay on delivery for someone. This does have some implications on how you set up your logistics. The other point is that mobile is finally catching up and to the rest of the European side. Mobile enabled was really lagging behind in Germany for a long time. It's finally reaching there. Part of this might be the way the German demographics. And this could also explain lower levels of social media in Germany. About 30% of Germans are over the age of 60. And so we found that the take-up of a lot of social media and mobile-enabled websites has been actually slower. That being said, it is catching up fast. And there is increasing acceptance of both mobile and the social media side. France is an interesting market, sort of a flip between both the UK and Germany in that sense. It's more volatile in a sense than the UK market. It is a very large e-commerce market with a good B2B side as well. It has it has its own platforms as well as the Amazon. Amazon is #1 like everywhere else, but it has its own homegrown champions as well. It does also have a strong level of, high level, 60% level of payment online through credit cards and debit cards, the carte bleue in France. It has one of the highest average revenue per unit, so how much people spend across Europe. And I think what's one of the interesting players in France and how this is developed is that it has these huge retail giants. One forgets that the largest hypermarket, supermarket store in Europe, across Europe, #2 in the world after Walmart, is Carrefour, it's French. Decathlon is Europe's largest sporting goods store. Leroy Merlin, Europe's largest, one of the largest in the world, DIY stores. So it has these huge champions which in fact stimulate as well, have a knock-on effect on cross-border sales, and that's worth looking at for France in particular. Now, I wanted to talk about some of the e-commerce choices you'll face, and we really, distilling it down, I think there are really 3 choices that a company can decide on in terms of e-commerce anywhere in the world, and in particular in Europe. And they have different pros and cons. Now, the first one is what we would call an online mall, and that's basically Amazon. And that is a fantastic place to go if you are new to export and just dipping your toes in there, because Amazon provide, and there are other platforms. I mean, I mentioned Otto, but this for Germany, but there are many others. Amazon just happens to be the largest in the world in most markets, with the exception of China and Japan. But for Europe, it's the clear leader. These online malls do provide a sort of one-stop shop. You bring your product, they can look after the pricing, they can look after the delivery of it, the logistics. So you deliver some pallets of your product, and they will put it on their website and make sure it all gets sent out and payments secure and everything. So that's really easy. There are some real disadvantages of it. The first is that there's no way that you can build your own brand on a site like this. You put your product up, it is surrounded by your competitors. And you have no control, really, of where it is and how it's presented. This means that it is very price determinant, these are very price sensitive, that it tends to pull prices down as your competitors will say, oh, let's try and get a bit more, let's get a bit more sales up. So they'll, so prices tend to be very, very, very competitive, and consumers and businesses tend to make price decisions rather than other things. So that's one of the big, the fact that there's no brand development and therefore price determinant is a very big disadvantage. The next one that we see exporters using consistently is to use your distributor platforms. And I'll put in some examples of what I mean by this. But just to say, this is an easy way again, and it's a way of handing over a lot of the difficulties and challenges of exporting, like logistics, something like that, to your distributor. But be wary of a few disadvantages. Again, it is quite narrow. Your distributor, he's only as good as his database. You also really have little control. Marketing depends on his ability, not yours. So the brand development, at the end of the day, you have to wonder, am I developing my distributor's brand, or am I developing my brand? And then one of the other disadvantages that I'd say, which you don't always think about in the beginning, is that you don't have really end client interface. If the end client, the person that actually buys your product, the database is held by your distributor. And any upsell is determined by your distributor, not necessarily by you. And I guess the other thing, which goes without saying, and I haven't even put on this, is that you have to maintain seriously good relations with your distributor. What we would like to propose is a third solution, which we think works extremely well. It allows you to have the control, to have brand development, to reach a broad level of possible targets, and really market your brand and sales. And that is your own country-specific localized websites. And I'll talk about that. But first, let's talk about a little bit distributor platforms, since so many of you use that. There tend to be 2 types of distributor platforms. The first was what I would call a very generalist distributor sites. So I'll put an example here of Lowe's in the States, for example, or this one, Elf in the UK. Now, you'll see, your product is right there on these general ones. It's right there next to lots of other ones. So if you make kettles, well, there's lots of other companies that are producing their kettles right there on the same page. And that's why, even if you're not on Amazon, if you're on a generalist distributor site, you tend to be price determinant. Now, the alternative is to have a dedicated distributor, and they have dedicated verticals. So for example, this one on the right here, Tree of Life, they do wholesale ordering of organic products and things like that. And again, though, because they're marketing several different types of competitors, again, it does in the end end up being price determinant. Or else, or else you take the example here on the left-hand side of Rexel for electrical things, and they have, the problem there is that your brand is subservient to the Rexel brand. So, and again, the Rexel brand is the one who really has the end client interface. And over time, this really can impede sustainable sales growth. And what we find works really well for our clients is what we would call localized websites. And these are localized websites which can be e-commerce enabled or not. But even if you choose an online mall solution, the Amazon solution, it's worthwhile having a website in your target market where people can go, and you can go and search out clients, drive leads, and then Amazon acts as a procurer. It acts as a fulfillment station. You develop your brand in that market. You control the pricing. You control the marketing of it, but Amazon does the fulfillment. In that sense, you're applying a very different relationship with Amazon. Equally, you can do the same with a distributor. If you control your image and your brand in a local market, your distributor then acts as a point of sale. He acts as the person storing your, stocking your equipment, doing the end mile delivery, and perhaps after sales. But you are the company who really control the brand, make sure the pricing is correct, make sure the marketing is right, and have the interface with end clients. And for some of our clients, and I'll get back to some case studies on this, I think the top image there you have of Eurodental Depot. Basically, they've said, okay, we don't even need that distributor to be, we can really outsource the logistics to our distributor. We can be the e-commerce platform, put in the e-commerce platform on a localized website, and then we have real control. And let's just explore what that really means for that. So what is a localized website? Localized websites for us are localized, optimized for your visitors. And the best way of explaining this is to go back to basics a bit and say, what are search engines? And know that search engines are localized. Now in Europe, you're lucky. Google has about 90% market share across Europe. By the way, it's got about 67% market share in the USA. So, Google is the one to go for. So that's at least the good thing. It's a lot easier than working with search engines that you might not be used to, like, Baidu in China or Naver in South Korea. So you're up with Google. So that makes life simple. Now, Google has its own issues here. Google optimizes for its own markets. So if your search engine is country specific, then it follows that you have to be country specific. So what do search engines look for? They look for unique quality content. That's the key. They also will look for compliance. Are you compliant, digitally compliant? And in Europe in particular, that's very important. And then they'll look for keywords, which will allow them to rank your website and according to the different markets, and also evaluate how well your website functions in that market. So, the key is optimize for your visitors. Now I'm going to give you some examples of how that works in different markets.
Susanna, shall I jump in for poll number 3?
Oh, great idea. Thank you.
Okay, well look, please, I'm going to launch this one. This is the third poll out of 3 out of 4. So here we go. And this is, do you have localized websites for your European markets? Well, obviously, as Susanna was giving the examples, I mean, companies like Apple have done it. They sort of wrote the book and showed us how to do it. They have localized websites in every single European country. That's why Apple has been so successful with their online sales and the $200 billion they have over in Ireland. But what have we got here in terms of response? We've got, yes, 5% have been successful at doing it in all markets. Bravo. We want to say that, I mean, that's really a huge endeavor and well done. 38% are saying yes in some markets, 40% are still thinking about, and 18% are saying no. Well, look, I mean, thank you for that. It is time for me, therefore, to say, there you go. That is poll number 3 that I'm closing, and I'm going to say, Susanna, back to you.
Thank you very much, John. I want to give you some examples here about different markets and different results. First of all, Google has, over in 28 different markets, at least 28 different search engines. For example, if you have different languages, you're going to have in different countries, like Google Germany versus Google France. So you have the same ranking algorithm, different results, because there are different languages. Okay, that sort of seems like an obvious one. If you have, in Germany, you have German Google. You're going to have, so your website has to be in German to be ranked. Now, in the same language in different countries, this also happens in Europe, for example, and across the States. English is the same language in the States as in the UK, more or less. These are different Googles, however. Google UK is different from Google in the States. Same ranking algorithm, different results. You can also have different languages, the same country. A good example of this is Switzerland, where you have, if you go onto Google Switzerland, you have the choice between German or French, for example. Same in Belgium, French or Flemish. So again, same ranking algorithm, different results. And in some countries, in fact, many countries, same country, same language, different devices. The best example for this is Italy, where you're going to get a very, very different response if you're Googling something in Italian on your PC or on your mobile phone. So different ranking algorithms, different results. So again, it is very market specific. Just because you rank well in the US doesn't mean you rank well in the UK. Just because you rank well in France doesn't mean you rank well in Germany. So you have to take that into account right from the start. Your current website, your home-based website, is not the one that's going to rank well in your export market. So moving on, I wanted to give you some examples about, just a website localization. Before we get to that, just here's a sort of a quick cheat list, as it were, of what we would define, how we define a localized website. They are market-specific and they are client-focused. So the domain name is registered. So it'd be IBT Online in the US, .de for Germany, .fr for France. The navigation on it is multilingual, and the little flags on the top of things. It's mobile enabled. We discussed that already. We might have to adjust the design a little bit just to make sure that it fits the local country. Obviously, language is important, but so are terms. If you're going to sell in euros, you have to make sure everything's in euros, that everything is metric, and so on. And then obviously optimize for search engines, for keyword search. Hosting locally really helps. The correct content management system, and that's basically the software that you build the thing on. Regulatory requirements, and that's extremely important for Europe, and increasingly so. And then social media. And any website has to these days have a social media platform and strategy to build on. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples now, and one of the first ones, these are some of the ones that we, as I think John mentioned, we work with a lot of different companies. This is not something new in the world, but some of the ones I wanted to give you really was this one here. This is a U.S. company where we run a UK website, a French website, and one of the things they've chosen, the method that they have, is to generate leads for their distributors across markets. So they do a lot of trade shows as well, and they use their websites to generate leads for those trade shows with social media campaigns going on, targeting specific specific trade shows, either for themselves or for their distributors, really optimizing the investments that trade shows have. And also helping, hopefully, finding some new distributors at those trade shows. Again, putting out, do you want to be a distributor page in French? Gets them quite a different response. So, it's I think worth looking at right from the start. Even if you're a U.S. company, having a UK website means having a new website. If your US website doesn't do the job that you think it would just because it's in English. You need something that is UK specific in order to generate the leads possible. And I wanted to show you this graph, which is, I think, quite interesting because it really shows the effect of social media combined with localizing. So these are just some you know, every website has to be monitored and looked at in terms of performance. And I thought this was an interesting one because it shows on the one side a UK site and a French site, basically operating on the same level over a period of 12 months. And you can see that in the UK, the level jumped very significantly about 3 months ago when we started putting social media, in particular good social media blogs about client-specific issues on the UK site. And that really had a fantastic effect, basically doubling for their number of visitors, you know, very dramatic. And that's the great thing about the about websites as well. You can look at and monitor change and marketing efforts very easily. In the French websites, it's almost all organic for that, but it's nevertheless, you can see that it's quite stable at around the sort of 350 level for the number of visitors at least. There's less social media. We're going to be doing that shortly, but I sort of really, I think, a good graphic to show the effect of having both a localized website and social media kicking in at the same time. This is a website that started 12 months ago when at the time they had really a tiny number of visitors. Organic visitors were about 55 organic visitors per month. That's all per country. Total number of visitors about 130 for each market, and now you know, significantly higher. And that has to do with, you know, within 1 month, just localizing it increased that threefold in the case of the French site, and adding the social media doubled it again. So there you go. That's a sort of good proof of what you can do with both localized and social media together. Another example we have here is just about supporting distributors. This is, again, a sort of mid-cap company, private sector, privately owned, again, that relies on a lot of distributors creating. They were very keen to get some German, new German distributors. They have lots of different verticals. They have B2B, government, public sector, private sector. So they have a lot of different distributors in each market. And they have decided to pull back all of their marketing equipment, all of their pricing, and so on, into their own hands and really control it better, and leaving that all on their website, so that the distributors really act as a sales force and a stockist rather than marketeers. And that's had a great effect on them. It's also really helped them find new distributors. You know, one of the things that, you know, a good distributor is always out looking, but they're out looking also for companies who really care about their markets. And having a local website has allowed the company to really say, or has allowed distributors to recognize that this is a company that really cares about their markets, really cares about supporting them. And they've had great replies from that. I'm going to kind of whiz through now because I did look at the time but I do want to bring up this last case study here. It's a UK company, and again, we're building websites for them in different markets. Here, what's really important for the company as well is their brand, and they have a sort of slow burn, you know, they in terms of their sales, because they sell predominantly to the public sector, to governments, and so these are large, long-term contracts. They have to have a continuous level of reminding governments that they're there, so that when the government is ready, or the local authority is ready, they immediately think of this company. So that there's sort of a regular reminder. So the social media aspect becomes really key in making sure that these export websites work well for this company. And this is something that we see again and again for mid-cap companies, for small, mid-sized companies, is that they need to own their brand and develop their brand over the long term to make sure that they are punching above their weight, really, that they're really optimizing their export sales. And so again, that leads me on to sort of, the last sort of message, which is that, if you're going to have export websites, you need to have at the same time a social media campaign. And social media is now, it's so dominant in all aspects of marketing. It's kept, Amazon, Google are attracting up to 50% of all digital advertising in most of the, within the EU and in the US, in fact. So it's really worth looking and saying, okay, these are dominant players. Where are they really active on? Again, Europe is not complex in that sense. There's lots of local social media platforms, but the biggest one throughout for all of them is Facebook. So the Facebook advertising is a very, very effective way of getting your products right front of the line, not just for consumers but for companies as well. We have several other webinars on social media only, so I'm going to leave you with that and hopefully have just a little bit of time for questions. We have a lot of resources on our websites, as John mentioned earlier. You can go back and look at any one of the case studies that I mentioned. For more details on those case studies, go to our website. Also, for other webinars on social media or logistics, go to our website. John, I rushed through at the end there. I'm sorry, but do we have any time?
Susanna, I saw that, but hang on, look, there was a quick poll. I wanted to get in my fourth poll, so please,
I'm so sorry.
can I ask you, there you go, sitting online with what Susanna was talking about, social media. What are your thoughts, please? How are you towards social media? Are you on social media? Are you on those platforms in your home market and export markets? Are you active perhaps only in your own home market? Are you thinking about it, or is it not at all? Now, it's interesting. Well done. I'd like to say that there's a full 20% that say that they're doing it home market and their export markets. That's chapeau, bravo. There's 60% that are active online in their home market. And again, well done. 11% thinking about it and 11% are saying no. Very interesting. Thank you. That information will be back with you. So here we go. That is belatedly the close of the fourth poll. And I guess, Susanna, it is time to go to questions. I'm clicking down now. And let's just jump to it. There is there's a question here. I'm just picking the first one. Very kindly, thank you very much indeed. Amanda says, thank you, good webinar. But how do I start? What do I do to start selling online in Europe? Where do I start?
Great question. There are lots of different strategies to start, but I think for us, if you look at the lowest hanging fruit, just go for, where are you most liable to get the best return, the fastest, the quickest. And that's usually what we would prefer to see. And those tend to be the very large markets, Germany, France, UK, and they tend to be also in places where you might have a good in-market partner. So where you've got a lot of other key ingredients in place, adding the localized website has a very dramatic effect and very fast effect on your revenues. And that's what we like to see. The other markets can be a little bit slower because you don't yet have things in place. Just one example, Germany, that's 85 million consumers. If you include Austria, parts of Switzerland, you're talking about 100 million people. Just huge economy. That could well be the top one if you've got a good in-market partner there. If you've got your logistics already sorted out, add a localized website and you will have very impressive return on investment in a very rapid time.
So, conclusion, sort of get online, start in Germany. Well, okay, question number 2, rushing to it. We use distributors for our European sales. What about e-commerce channels? I suppose I might just pick that up, Susanna, give you a break and just say, I know, and we'd like to introduce you there, Sean, to Michael, he's one of our directors focused on this. Multiple channels. What we see is savvy companies using distributors perhaps in some markets, other markets using a go-to direct. So sometimes it's direct and indirect, and sometimes it's on and offline. So it can be, and perhaps a way to optimize it is really use distributors, of course, and perhaps in other markets go direct, multiple channels. Another quick question, Susanna, one is here: how do we handle e-commerce and logistics? I think that refers back to a recent webinar.
Yeah, we had a webinar recently, actually, just on e-commerce and logistics with a logistics partner. In Europe, there's a huge amount of choice. I would say, as a sort of, I'm a little bit biased here, but I do think the Dutch have got a fantastic offer. They've really cornered the market a little bit in bonded warehousing. And in parts of logistics. So that could be one way of looking at it. And we do, as I mentioned, have a webinar just on e-commerce and logistics and localized websites that you can download and go into. But there are a lot of different choices. Bonded warehousing is one good example of that, where you don't have to pay duties and VAT until it's actually sold. Another one, for example, is that there are really good solutions just with UPS, which some of our clients use. It depends on the value of the product, which one makes more sense in terms of economics, if you've got something small or something large to sell. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. And this one, question number 4 says, what about getting paid? And I suppose, Susanna, if I just flip back to that, you mentioned SEPA, that is the Single European Payments Area, and indeed that is for the Eurozone, and it gives you a very simplified tools and standards. The banks have to implement that, and that is clear. We actually have some information on our blog section which might interest you, which is called Preferred Online Payments by Country, because they do vary. So if you go to ibt.onl/ I think it's a blog there, and search, you'll find about different payments in area. And again, from our point of view, we build those gateways. It's part of what we call our gateway payments interfaces that we build for our clients. Susanna, I think this has got to be the last one. European digital, going back to that slide on European digital single market. Anita is saying here, I want to know more.
Good. We are actually thinking about having a webinar pretty soon about it. It is really a fantastic vision of what is going to be happening in the next 2 or 3 years. There's an enormous amount of investment going in, both in terms of hardware, just broadband and rolling out, and also about harmonization for e-commerce. So it's definitely a space to watch, and we will be having a webinar just on the digital single market coming up pretty soon, probably just after the summer.
Well, Susanna,
EU website.
Pardon me, I'm sorry, Susanna, jumping in there, but I think I have to say now, as we're coming we're ending now, we thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar. We hope that you found lots of useful information, lots of facts, lots of takeaways to help you grow your online sales across Europe and develop your business here in Europe. Please do know there's a quick survey, so stay online. As I shut this down, there's going to be a survey, so we welcome your feedback, and don't forget that you're going to get the recording. The slide deck will arrive by email, so watch out for that on Friday. So this is me, and this is everybody here saying, Ian, Susanna, thank you very much indeed for today's webinar. I think you've done a great job. And so on behalf of us all, we'd like to say thank you for attending, and let's go and let's sell online in Europe. Thank you very much indeed, and have a great day.